So I'm here to propose something very disruptive. Author it, of course, which is why I'm standing here, is at the heart of it, but let's get into it for a little bit. So I want to just take a picture from our LabelNet forum about the end-to-end process as they see it. And let's start with what is driving this. What are the changes? First and foremost, safety change. Of course, we've got a signal we've detected. We've got spontaneous AEs. We have other drivers that are starting this process. Hopefully, we also have lots of new products. We also have things like our beloved CMC changes. So there's many drivers that cause us to have changes. Those changes have to be confirmed, reviewed, which is typically a manual process. You approve that, and now corporate global labeling is preparing this core submission package. And quite often doing what? Emailing it, shipping it over the wall to your affiliates. And somehow the magic happens, hopefully in between there, that corporate knows, did that happen? Did they accept the change? Did they submit it? Because some inspector is going to come asking someday, well, how long did it take? When you found that signal, did it get to the patient in some foreign country? So then the lovely health authority negotiation begins. So now we have red-lined Word documents, our favorite, going back and forth, getting changes done. And then the artwork management was always somebody else's problem, but still a necessary part that had to be done. And then updating websites and the like, and then how do we get that into the package, onto the product, into the label, and out to the patient. Now, as we talk about technology and being disruptive, the problem is there is no one single product that can do all of this. Is that a fair question, right? Is it fair to say that one piece of software should be able to do all of these things? We don't peel a potato with a frying pan, right? So why should we expect a piece of software to manage all of those changes and all of those things? So as we look at the piece parts, where we start is, in today's vocabulary, a RIM system. As we look at content management and translation management, there are a number of tools, and of course, Author It is in that upper quadrant for me. And underneath that, we have a box for deviation management. So how do we find out that we have a problem in the first place? How we get that back to corporate? And is that an email or what have you? And that's where a tool like Integras comes into play. Or how do we find out that a local label wasn't compliant with our core data sheet? And that's where a product like Compliance View comes in and does that post-analysis or retrospective. And we now have this whole big category of artwork that was always there, but most often ignored. And then that moves into our ERP solutions. And so how do we deal with getting those product changes into that system, getting it to the label, getting it into the packages, and so forth? And underpinning all of that is a workflow, or as Gartner calls it, IBPMS, Integrated Business Process Management System. And there's some up-and-comers there. So Integras is I would say, the de facto standard, which I'm going to talk today about as well. What I want to focus on is using Author It to be that disruptive component to integrate with Integras for the deviation management as well as the end-to-end tracking. So just focus on two of those tools in the kitchen, but I'm peeling my taters with Author It because I think that's where we can be disruptive and make the most hay in this end-to-end labeling process. Let's make sure we're on the same page about our current model. Right? So we receive a change request about a safety update, excuse me, from a local affiliate. And they send in that request. Corporate gets it and they process it. Now they review it. They review it by all those manual things I talked about. And then perhaps, and this varies company to company, at some point they notify that requester, now's the time to go. Go make that change and start dealing with the rest of that downstream process. But then they have to say, what's the impact to the rest of the world? Does this change update my core data sheet? Does it go everywhere to 135 countries and all those translated labels? And so that's the next process that starts. Now, I have a colleague in our forum that works for a company where she manages all of this in the #1 database in the world, and that's Excel, right? And her fear is that someday she's going to get run over by a Budweiser truck and her company is going to come to a screeching halt, right? Because she has so much knowledge capital that can't be put in 6,500 and 535 rows by columns and so forth, because there's too many dimensions, there's too much data. So looking at the future model, we still get that information coming in-house. Instead of pulling up my Word version of the core data sheet, I go into Author It, and I pull up my component-based core data sheet. and I change that one component that's been impacted. And because I've done that, I now, through the lineage or genealogy I prefer, I know exactly what items have used that component around the world, what translations, etc., and can instantly make that impact analysis right within the knowledge I have in authoring. And then from there, in that same environment, we can review and approve those components and distribute them globally. We're all in a centralized system. Now you may be saying, what and how? If we look at those process steps, how does Authorit and Integros play into this? So our proposed approach is that, of course, we start with that tracking system, not email, right? But Integros is that tool to get that request in-house. And there are a number of major pharma companies doing this globally. It is a cloud-based solution, right? So anybody in the world can make that request. Now, here's the new twist that wasn't in the February timeframe when we presented this approach and testimony to the speed at which things are changing. We have the ability for Integros not to swivel chair anymore, but to create a work order in the Authorit platform to say, you need to go change your core data sheet, which to me is that integration that's necessary to make this progress forward, right? So now the author gets an email, gets a notification, gets an alligator clip on their earlobe, whatever it is, to say you have a core data sheet update to make. So they go into Authorit, they make that change, the changes are routed for review and approval, and now the local edits and translations are made also, again, within Authorit. Now here's where we have one of those gray areas. Where's your dashboard going to be? What data do you want to keep in Authorit? What data do you want to keep in Integros? But the beauty of it is we can send the data back and forth. We can make this work in both platforms. And now we start the HA submission process, that negotiation and tracking of that, which takes weeks and months and so forth, and years sometimes. And that's what Integros does. So we're talking about a truly integrated environment, linking the two worlds together. And then here's where what I've spent my career on is unstructured content management. Where does the DMS come into play? And I think from a disruptive perspective, there are some religious elements we still want to hold on to, and that is we want archival versions of some of those things we're producing, right? That's what we still store in our content management solutions today. So that's the role I see of the DMS, not for authoring the core data sheet, not for authoring the labels, but only storing that snapshot output. So let's look at our demo here. So I'm starting in Integros. I'm putting a request in for our product to make an update for a new warning. So I've done that in Integros. What you can see is there is workflow elements that are appropriate at that level, at that stage of the business process within the Integros tool. I can even connect an Integros back to a Word version of the core data sheet if I chose to. Or I could even link to the component-based in Authorit through a URL, right? We can do a number of things that way that are already there in the software. So I have that item in there, it's approved, it's time to get to work. And now, for some of the new magic that Steve and company have produced, is this work order process, workflow within Authorit, right? So now at the component level, I can manage the fact that I have authoring work to do. And so I have to make that change to the core data sheet. So I go out into the Authorit tool, into my core data sheet. I'm in my special warnings and precautions. But what would we do today? As we heard yesterday at the Innovation Council, what's my number one tool? Cut and paste. But we're disruptive here. We're not going to do Control K or Control C, Control V, and all those things anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to go in that search window and put in our safety changes about vertigo. And in the same therapeutic area, we've had product issues with vertigo. We've written it before. What I can do here in Authorit is I can put in vertigo and get that approved component that already has been approved, reviewed, and ready to go. And by selecting that, add it to my core data sheet. And now I can route that for review and in a collaborative way. But the beauty of this review, and what doesn't show up in this image, is when you route a core data sheet and you've only updated one component, that component that's in the box is highlighted. It's the element that you're asked to review. Everything else is untouchable. It's immutable. It's grayed out. But it's there for context. But now your focus is only on that component. Now, how would you do that today? You have an umpty-ump page core data sheet. You want somebody to review just section 14.3. You'd have to type that up in an email. Look, guys, just look at 14.3. And here's the document. You'd send it out. And for sure, you'd get edits to other sections, right? You'd have to do compares, you have to make sure, because you couldn't lock down the rest of the document, because Word isn't that type of platform. And you've all, I see some smiles, you've experienced that. But Author It prevents that and guides the review. So again, shortening the time, focusing the time as we go through. Then the author makes all the changes, we route it for approval. Again, approving the overall project, but focusing on those things that have changed. So now that that component's approved, the project's approved, the document's ready to go. Now what happens? All those downstream consumers are being notified instantly that their core data sheet that they drew from, the parent to their documents, has been updated. And if you see the note here, it says this section has changed in the parent document. Hit the compare button. Whoa. So now I don't have to go back and read through 20 pages. I simply hit compare, and I'm given an interface that shows me my document on the right and the new paragraph in red even, so I don't even have to search. It tells me what's been added. I can accept, I can reject, or I can select portions of it, and that is also recorded. And when I do, that paragraph has now been saved automatically for me in my local label. Now the downstream changes for translations and so forth also happen as well. Right? Now we can track those here in Author It, we can track them in the end-to-end tracking tool or both, but at the end of the day, this is all based on the fact that we've tied all of these components together, right? And glued it together and not just put it into an unstructured Word document. When all of that is approved, or at the beginning when the core data sheet is approved, we're now back in Integras. And the power of Integras is this dashboard, all those dates. And so one of the things that we get out of the RIM system that goes into a tool like Integras is what are the dependent countries. So France doesn't go in, or Ecuador doesn't go in until France has approved their label, for example. And it keeps track of those dates in the clock and says, now you're on the clock, you have X number of days, and if not, we're going to send you the nasty grams, etc., and move on. Now this is where we can also tie it to the artwork, and typically those milestones are tracked in an Integras solution as well. We're tracking, we're managing, and we have all that together. Now, how do we do that? What happens when we're disruptive? Well, it relies on one big assumption. And the biggest one is that central management of all labels has to happen, meaning all your affiliates, anybody doing a labeling component is using one single system. Now I can tell you for Integras, that is already in production and working globally for some of the biggest pharma companies in the world. They get them to come to a cloud-based solution to track dates. So coming to the cloud-based solution in a Word-like environment to manage components and manage your labels should not be that big of a cognitive leap, right? Politically, it's disruptive. Culturally, it's disruptive. Technically speaking, I don't think it is, right? It's going to come with a lot of yelling and screaming, but that's how we can improve and change. So tying those two together, centrally managing them all in an Author It application, tying it to Integras is key. This is what we're trying to do. Be disruptive, make this thing happen, integrate these solutions together so that we can achieve these answers to address that question on the left. When did you know the signal needed to be changed, this precaution needed to be added, and how long did it take to get to the patient? That's the key. That's what we're after. That's what we're trying to solve.